Hello, my name is Tumaj. In this video, I'm going to talk about non-duality and my direct experience of a non-dual state of consciousness. I had a direct experience back in 2013. I did not call it non-duality at the time. When I had that experience, I did not know anything about non-duality. I was not practicing a spiritual tradition, or I was not pursuing a spiritual realization or any awakening of any sort. I was simply practicing a method of contemplation within a branch of Western philosophy called phenomenology. Phenomenology is a science of consciousness, but it is a study of consciousness different from what we know within academia. It is a study of consciousness from a first person point of view, in a sense that you're not trying to presuppose anything about consciousness, including the idea that consciousness emerges from matter. The idea is to suspend all our assumptions about consciousness, matter, and the whole reality, and just look at the stream of experience and try to understand and analyze it without making any claims about its existential status. The key method within phenomenology is called phenomenological reduction. The method is never advertised as a way to spiritual realization or spiritual experience, even though there are suggestive hints by Edmund Husserl, the founder of the phenomenology, and his assistant Eugen Fink, indications of the radical nature of this method. For example, in some place they talk about reduction as a method which brings spirit to its own ground, which opens the human person or dehumanizes the soul, opening it towards its own ground. But it never talks about it as a spiritual awakening. I think for the most part because he's trying to remain professional and technical about philosophy instead of advertising it as a self-help kind of pursuit. Anyways, the method, if I go into the details of the method that eventually led me to have that non-dual experience, as I mentioned earlier, it is about suspending all assumptions about reality. That includes pretty much everything, and that's why the method is not an easy uh, attempt at getting within the self. It because at any level you become aware of a certain class of assumptions you have about the world of consciousness. So you suspend them, which is what reduction does. And then suspending them, you become gradually aware of more assumptions that we've been holding on to without being aware of them. So you suspend them and you kind of keep doing that. You regress back within the self until the thin ice on which you're standing breaks and you fall on the lap of the ground of existence, which is a non-dual state of consciousness. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I practiced that phenomenology for over 10 years and particularly the method for about 5 or 6 years without having any expectations because as I said, it's not mentioned that if you practice this, at some point you're going to have a non-dual experience. I think that that's one of the things that helped me reach that non-dual state because I did not put any expectation on that reduction practices that I had. I simply spent hours a day trying to regress back into that zone whereby you adopt an indifferent and neutral position in relation to all philosophical or existential claims about reality, the self, the human existence, and the world. Later, from the point of view of Vedanta, when I looked at it, reduction is really a practice of trying to regress back into the position of witness consciousness, whereby you're witnessing the stream of consciousness without being involved in it. So you are in a sort of a transcendental position. That's why Edmund Husserl also called the method transcendental reduction. So practicing reduction for years without any expectations or without knowing what I'm against. Eventually in 2013, it was the August of 2013, the 20th of August, midnight. Uh, I clearly remember that, of course, and I'm again reflecting on the experience, trying to regress back and back within myself, and all of a sudden it happens. I like to emphasize that the happening, what happens, is really technically there is no continuous uh, existence before the experience or before the breaking of the ice and after that. So there is this human experience that I'm having, that we're having, and the next second, next instant, the whole thing is vanished. The whole thing disappears instantly. Disappearing, not in a sense that it takes a duration, it takes a little bit of time for this to disappear, like as if things uh, go out of my way or anything. It just all of a sudden there's this human experience, the next second there's nothing. Uh, the human self, the whole experience of human existence, including all levels of experience, such as perception, seeing, hearing, feeling, all of it is gone. So the world is not there anymore. The whole cosmos, the universe, uh, it's gone. There's no distinctions anymore. It's obviously it's absolutely impossible to describe that state for a very obvious reason, because it's a non-dual state of consciousness. There is no distinctions within it in order to apply language to it and make a description out of it. And and what happens, one other reason or one other way of putting it uh, is that uh, me, this human person, not being there anymore, the world not being there anymore, it's in the sense that there's no knower left, there's no known left. There's subject, the object are both disintegrated and reintegrated into a higher level of reality, which is the non-dual state. So the subject-object duality is totally destroyed, and with it, the human self, the world is gone. There's no sense of duration, there's no temporality. So that's where you realize you understand what eternity is. Understanding not in a rational sense, but you know what it is because you are that eternity. You understand. Immediately it was clear for me. Wow, uh, the promise or the suggestion in all traditions, religious traditions, of this immortality on all eternal life, it was immediately clear that this is it. This is immortality. Immortality is not in the sense of living forever. It's not about an indeterminate extension within time, but it's a matter of being free from the passage of time. So that was a big mark of that experience. Also with space, it was a state of infinite expansion, but expansion not in the sense of in space. It was infinity in the sense that there was no limitation by space, by any dimensions in space or dimensions in time. So you're infinite, you're eternal, and the you is gone. So there's no you, this, that, here, there. All the distinctions are wrapped up or reintegrated into their original state. A very important thing, I mean, I could, even though it's impossible to describe the thing, I could kind of try to put into words certain key features which I could recognize or look or reflect on after the experience. One, as I mentioned, lack of duration and extension in space and time. So if I look back at it, I cannot say the experience lasted, for example, 2 minutes or 10 minutes. It has no duration. The experience was always there. Even now it is there. It's just a matter of me recognizing it or not recognizing it. So it's an eternal reality. And another important mark of it was recognition. It wasn't something that I saw or discovered for the first time. seeing that experience or being in that experience, not as this human person, but as the self, as the non-dual state itself, it was recognized to be the true self, the true nature. It's as if I'd been there before. It just, for some time, uh, I was blind to it. I was not seeing it, but it was a matter of, it was not at all a shocking experience. I gotta mention that it was an aha moment that, huh, that was my reaction. Huh, how did I not ever see this? How am I not seeing this all the time? Because it's in front of me, it's in front of us, everyone. It's our own true nature. It's the only reality. So that's fascinating, and that's a paradox about it, that you see this whole world of differentiated reality of objects, things, subjects. But when you realize that state, you realize there's only Brahman, that non-dual reality, whatever name you want to put on it. And there's absolutely no way to reconcile these two accounts of reality, because realizing that non-dual state, you realize that's the true nature of all things at all times. It is not that the non-dual state has become this world. It's not that it's degenerated or differentiated into this world. The non-dual state is always the non-dual state. It's the reality, the indivisible reality all the time. It doesn't change at all. It's a false superposition that is laid out on that non-dual state. It's as if it's like a dream within that non-dual state. This whole world, this whole differentiation that I'm this person, you're that person. It's like a dream within that non-dual state. The non-dual state doesn't change, doesn't become the world. There's no becoming about it. It is beyond time and space. So recognition that it's my true nature, that I've been there at some point, uh, and I'm always there. It's nothing new. I just recognize it immediately. It's like a friend, a face that you haven't seen for a while, but you've been very intimate with them, and you see them, you recognize them immediately. Ah, hey, I know you. I recognize you, because you don't need to think about it. It's like, that's it. I know you. And that's the big or very important mark of that state of experience of yeah, and that's another thing. I don't like to use the term experience because I think it's a very inaccurate word for it, because when we talk about experience, experience always involves some sort of a duration. Whether we talk about external experience of an external object, or experience of an emotion, a thought, or even a huge class of spiritual experiences where you need some duration in order for experience to happen, or in order for your awareness to know or perceive that experience. But that non-dual state, that's why I prefer to use the word state for it. It's something that's beyond experience. Experience also implies experiencer and something that's experienced, and the process of experience, which is the part that demands some duration or temporality, but all of it is kind of, it's disappeared. There's no experiencer, nothing experienced. It's just nothing, like absolute void, but an absolute void that's the total reality. It's not nothingness. And I would another important mark of the experience, it's not a feeling at all. Well, the human person is entirely annihilated in that experience. So there's no feeling, there's no human process or human phenomena involved, including seeing or thinking or nothing. And so it's a seeing of a new kind, it's a seeing of a higher order that you realize you're always in it. It's not something that your eyes open, it's always open, but we are blind to it, or as a matter of fact, our own perception and experiences, our own human, the whole human phenomena is something that's veiling that reality in a paradoxical way. I mean, I can go into this later, that why there's such a paradox. It's very interesting because it relates to quantum physics also. You can see parallel within quantum physics and modern cosmology, the two accounts of seeing everything within the universe and out from the outside the universe, where you come along with two contradictory accounts of reality. But that's a that's a different discussion. And it's a new seeing. I mean, not a new seeing, it's a seeing with absolute self-evidence. The best way I've thought about it for years, the best way I would describe that, I mean, it's not a description, it's an analogy. Consider out of all of our senses, the most self-evident of our senses is seeing for us. Seeing is the thing that we rely on the most. I can't say the most, but it's one of the most reliable senses for us. So when you see something, you're pretty much 100% sure it's there. And if you're in a normal state of consciousness, not hallucinating, you know it's there, it's absolute self-evidence, you see what it is. So the seeing within the non-dual state, the seeing in the sense that it's not composed of a seer and the seen, but it's a pure seeing. Compared to that seeing of the spirit, this human seeing is sheer blindness. So we think we see. That seeing is it is something. This is sheer blindness. This whole perception, seeing the world, compared to that knowing that is in the non-dual state, it's sheer blindness. And it's, as a matter of fact, the very thing that's veiling that knowing of the spirit, knowing in a sense of gnosis that mystics talk about. So that is the non-dual, as much as I could talk about it. The key features of it, it's eternal, it's infinite, not in the sense of being extended indefinitely, in the sense of being beyond time and space and causality. It's not phenomenal in the sense that you don't see anything, any particular thing. It's all the human seeing and feeling is disintegrated into the seeing of the spirit, a knowing of the spirit. It's pure knowledge, I would say. The state is a pure knowledge. And the sense of recognition that what you realize is nothing new for you. It's not something that fascinates you. It's something that you recognize as your own self, as a friend, as your best friend that you haven't seen for a while, and you see their face and you recognize them immediately without any thought put into it. And and the self-evidence aspect of that experience, in the sense that when you have that experience, you know that you've seen the truth. I immediately recognize that everything ever mentioned in all spiritual and religious traditions about God, truth, infinity, you recognize. It's not something human. I cannot explain that. You recognize that they're all talking about this thing. You recognize immediately, instantly understand the words of all mystics and philosophers, that they're all talking about this same thing, but they misunderstand each other. All human beings, all creatures, all beings are singing the same song, put in different words, same meaning. They're talking about the same thing, but they're all putting it differently, and they quarrel over the wording and the phrasing of uh, uh, that non-dual, inexpressible, indivisible reality. Once you see that, and the biggest consequence of that experience was that I was driven as a kid with a fundamental need to know the truth. It was a thirst to know the truth, which drove me into philosophy, science, readings, hours a day. That thirst was gone. I was not interested in reading for the sake of more knowledge of what is this existence or what is the meaning of life. I lost absolute interest in any of that right after the experience and up until this moment. I do read. Uh, I enjoy reading, but that's for a totally different purpose. It's to learn something, some skill, or if I read spiritual literature, it's for me to remind me or bring me closer to that experience so I can feel it closer to myself. And so it's a reminder for me. But the thirst to know, to get to the core and the meaning of reality, that's instantly satisfied forever. I mean, I have a good analogy for it. Imagine you've been starving for a while, and you think of food, and your mouth waters, and you really can't control yourself. And then you go and eat something. You eat as much as you can, and after you're full, you cannot even look at food. It's disgusting. It's repulsive. You're not even attracted to it. You don't even want to think about it. That's the sort of feeling I had after the experience, and up until this moment thinking of seeking for knowledge, like reading science or philosophy for the sake of, truth, the different schools that trying to explain what reality is, what it is not, you lose absolute interest in all of it because you know the reality very intimately to the extent that you don't need a description uh, uh, or school of philosophy or even a sentence or proposition to put it in. You just lose that interest, and to a large extent lose the interest to talk about it even, uh, because it's no one's gonna understand. However, if there are people who've had that experience, I immediately understand them, and they immediately understand me. Uh, with a few words, it's not necessary for them to explain anything, or we recognize each other, and their encounter might have been different. It doesn't have to be the same, but someone who's realized that non-dual state, which is identical with your true self and the highest reality, it's very easy to recognize them in the world. And yeah, so there's the lost desire, that thirst is satisfied totally, and the reading all this stuff is focused for, I mean, for different purposes. A big part of it, it has to do with the return of the hero. You have a journey and there's a return aspect to it, which is exactly what I'm going through after that experience. It's a returning to the world, bringing this news that, hey people, there's a truth, there's an absolute truth that really truly liberates you once you know it, and that you don't have to have faith in something that you don't understand, or faith in the sense of a religious uh, faith. You don't have to accept anything that's within yourself. You can contemplate whatever you want to do through actions, through uh, karma yoga, jnana yoga, whatever. The beauty of I mean, after the experience, there was a sort of insanity haunting me a few days after the experience. That was the insanity of my human self crawling back, trying to make sense of that experience. It's like trying to fit infinity into a finite vessel. It's gonna break. That's where my finite mind, even though I had that encounter, was trying to make sense of it, trying to naturally, without my control over it, it had the natural impulse to understand it, which is absolutely impossible. The finite cannot contain the infinite at any level, existential or uh, uh, what do you call it, philosophical. And so there was sort of insanity, and a big part of it had to do with the fact that when you have that experience, when you realize you're nothing that you ever thought about, after a few days, that becomes a pretty painful experience. Not at the moment of that encounter, but it becomes a very painful experience because everything you're attached to, the definitions, the ideals, what you are, it could be good qualities, it could be images, personas, all of it is vanished in a sense, vanished with absolute certainty. So you know that you're none of it. It's culture, the belonging, the attachments to the world. None of it you realize is real. Even the creation, because in that state you realize that that state is a permanent and natural state of reality. It's not that there's the non-dual state and that there's creation and all that. You realized all this thing, all the theories, stories about creation, philosophy, science. They're true relatively within the world system, but ultimately they're not real. There's never been a creation, and even there's never been a god in the sense that we could understand it as a human being, whether you're an atheist or a theist. It's a pretty painful experience after. It's a painful consequence of that experience to lose everything that you ever thought you are or you possess. Your philosophies, your ideals, your attachments, and there's a whole lot of attachments we are not even aware of. Even if you're the most liberated or free or open-minded individual, you are living or you contain a host of attachments that you're not even aware of until you lose them. And in a non-dual state of consciousness, you lose them. You lose all of them. And it's a very liberating experience, but wait a few days until your humanity is trying to catch up with that experience and you experience a pain. And for me, it, pain turned almost to insanity. And because I was alone, because the experience did not happen in a spiritual setting or in a setting where there's a support or people who've had that experience and they could explain to me, hey, you're okay, and this and that. And so as a result of that and sort of fear, a strong fear that has to do with my human aspect, not the non-dual self that you are. And because the non-dual experience does not destroy your humanity is destroyed or annihilated in that state, but after that you return to your humanity. The non-duality is the ultimate reality that has not changed, but um, from within the world, the human experience becomes painful. So as a result of that, I obsessively looked for people or places where the experience had been encountered, so I could get some support, some hope that it's fine. And I found it. I remember I did a lot of Google research, and the best keyword that I could use relating to my experience was the word vanishing or experience of disappearing of the world. And main literature that came up was in Upanishads, and some of the statements made by this Indian monk, Indian saint Ramakrishna, which I did not know at the time, but later I became very familiar with Ramakrishna and his work, and I read his life story, with which I'm very fascinated, by the way. That has a big impact or became a big support uh, emotionally for me after the experience. So, reading the Vedanta literature, I realized that this experience was recognized thousands of years ago, and they talked about it. And more specifically, the literature, the text that I referred to was Mandukya Upanishad, which talks about the fourth state of reality, which is the real state of reality. So the other three, the waking, the dreaming, and the what do you call it? Dreamless state, the 3D state, are the different or differentiated forms of a fourth state called Turiya. And the explanations or descriptions that they offer of Turiya was exactly my non-dual experience. I could I recognized it immediately. There was it wasn't I didn't even need to read more than a minute. So I became obsessed with those texts because they kept me close to that experience and gave me hope that it's okay, that your human self, can cope with that. It takes time, but it can. And so I obsessively read Vedanta literature, Upanishads, and the most interesting thing, the book that really relates directly to that non-dual state of consciousness, and I recommend that to anyone interested in non-duality, is Vasista Yoga. That textbook is my holy textbook literature, and uh, every sentence of it, it's non-dual wisdom. It takes me to a state very close to that non-dual state, and so I became my goal, that return journey from that experience, which is always part of the spiritual path. It's not just a spiritual realization and then that you're done. There's a return, whereas the fruit of that spiritual realization, each person, depending on their constitution, temperament, and talent, what are they going to bring down? How are they going to express that truth? What is the consequence? For me, it became doing a lot of research on it and expressing it in a sense that's relatable to a lot of people who, in our age and generation, have lost hope in spirituality and religion, which is understandable, and also are not able to find it in sciences also. But they cannot just simply, okay, if it's not in science, let's jump into religious. No, religion. That wasn't possible for me. So my goal is to articulate that, the possibility of that experience, in a sense that appeals to intellectuals, people who are not, I would say, spiritually oriented, but there's some spiritual seeking, some truth seeking element within them. Uh, because that's the class of people who are really disoriented or lost. They can't find it in science, they cannot accept any religious training, and but because of my own path, which went through neither science nor religion, but through a very rigorous, also appealing philosophy, which doesn't require you to accept any presuppositions, any convictions, to have faith. I think that's the best venue to bring the truth back to people, in the sense that giving them the possibility and the hope and the fact that it's available, that non-dual state is available to everyone at any time with any background. You don't have to be a saint. It's not about being sinful or not sinful. It has nothing to do with anything, absolutely. And under any circumstances, even if you're evil, the worst person, that's always available to you. It's your one free gift in this existence, because it's your true self. It's always there. It's not somewhere else. It's always here in the now. It's not at any other time. That's one paradoxical thing about it. You don't even have to seek it. It's there. You don't have to put any effort to realize that. And that's what makes it very difficult to realize it, because it's the one thing that you don't need to do anything in order to realize it. And it's the one thing that it's the simplest thing. It's always in front of you. It's not even hidden. It's in plain sight, and that's exactly why we cannot see it, because we are used to complexity. And so to give that hope, and uh, I don't know if I'll ever be able to take the method of reduction and put it in non-technical terms. It's a method. It's not an easy method. It's not a shortcut compared to spiritual traditions or disciplines where you have to do certain things to realize that. It takes hours of dedication, and I mean years of, you have to develop a way of thinking, way of thinking about the world, or even more so, uh, unlearning your already known ways of thinking about the world. So you need to unthink stuff in order to get to that zone, but you don't need to accept anything yet. You don't need to have faith in some sort of deity or uh, some sort of divine assistance in order to realize that state. And the reality of it is that you don't need to do absolutely anything about it, but you have to do at the same time something about it. Like doing the reduction took me there, but the reality is that when that happened, the reduction is not it's not a positive effort in the sense of doing something in order to get to that experience, but it's a matter of suspending things that you're already doing, detaching from them, dissociating from the everyday human engagements with the world, so that you dissociate to the extent that you completely become detached, and the thing that you're attached to dissolves, because it exists as a result of your attachment. It's not something that exists there and you're just looking at it, then for a moment you just don't look at it, and that's a non-dual experience. But the whole world, the phenomenon of being and existence, and the phenomenon of the world, it's something that exists as a result of our engagement with it. The moment you lose that engagement, you step back, you dissociate, its reality dissolves into its substratum, which is the non-dual state of consciousness, or pure consciousness, or pure existence, whatever you want to name it. And I like this mystic, the Persian mystic Bayazid Bastami. he says something about the pursuit of that truth, that truth is not found by seeking, but only those who seek it find it. That's beautiful and very true, because when that experience happens, when you encounter, you realize you didn't have to do anything about it because you are that truth, right? But at the same time, the person who shows no interest or doesn't do anything about it, they're not going to realize that truth, or identify with them. And the reason, the way I look at it is, the efforts that you put in to in the pursuit of truth, they're not the things that bring the truth to you, because the truth is already there and already what you are, but they're an expression of your longing and your love of the truth. It is as if the truth, the non-dual state of consciousness, the thing that drives all of us, our own true nature, it reveals itself to you when it sees that you love it enough, and your efforts are an expression of your love and longing and your respect. It is something that in me, and for a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of my friends, it's not something we decided on it. It's something that we were born with it for a lot of people. There's a fundamental need to know the truth. I was never even aware of it in this articulate sense before my non-dual experience. And it was only after that I realized everything that happened throughout my life was the pull, was the strong pull of that truth driving me toward itself. And everything I did for it was an expression of an intrinsic love that I had to know the truth. Love not in an emotional sense, because I'm not so much of a bhakti yoga person. That dimension in me is not developed that much, unfortunately. But it doesn't matter. You could be a person of any temperament, any constitution. There's a path to truth for any person, because the path runs within you, whoever you are. And as long as you reorient yourself, as long as you're passionate about it, if you're an intellectual, you can reach that truth. The doors are not locked for you. That's why one of my goal was to kind of bring that hope to that class of people, because as long as truth is concerned and the experience of truth is concerned, a lot of spiritual figures, they tell you, okay, if you're an intellectual, you will not be able to get to that. You have to shut down your mind. You should not think. But that's not true for a person who has the, speaking within the Vedanta or Hindu terms, the person who has the Jnani constitution and temperament, they cannot not think. That's their way, that's their constitution. So it's not about not thinking or not intellectualizing, but it's a matter of being guided within that structure. It's not about not thinking, it's about thinking properly, and in a way that's oriented towards that truth. And it takes time, it needs a master, it needs a teacher, as all of us did. For a lot of us, for those that are fortunate, the teacher might be in person, might be an embodied creature. For some of us, for me, that I did not have that luxury or was not born in that environment, my teacher or the person who led me to that experience sometimes appeared as a book, sometimes, like Edmund Husserl, the founder of phenomenology, had a huge impact on me. And without that, I would not have that experience at all. And so that's been my post-experience effort to kind of find the optimal ways of bringing that truth to other people. And it's not that I became a saint and all that. Not at all. I'm just even more human than ever, because once you realize that Brahman as the nature of all things, you realize that everything is Brahman, even the evil aspects of my humanity, everything is Brahman. So there's nothing to suppress, there's nothing to reject. You embrace the whole life. So the whole anti-worldliness attitude of spiritual traditions is prior to that experience. It's kind of very similar to reduction, because you're trying to suspend all those engagements that attach you to the world and keep you within it. So the goal of those practices within different spiritual traditions, where try to keep you detached from the world, is to come to that non-dual experience. But once you come to that, you realize that everything in the world, even the whole world itself, that we might say it's illusion, but it's really not illusion, but it is Brahman itself. There are no two, there's no illusion, and then there's the Brahman, but there's only Brahman. So you embrace all of it. You embrace your humanity, all the aspects of it, including good and evil, and you reintegrate them into a personality. Still, you do all the things that maybe within one particular tradition they call it sinful and all that, but you're more in control because uh, you're aware of all those aspects. You're not repressing anything, and so that's been my experience after. And my goal and my mission, my interest is particularly metaphysics, to express that metaphysical, considering the understanding, the direct understanding that I had through my experience, and to kind of articulate that for people who are interested, and give that hope to a lot of people who in this age are disillusioned or cannot find their path. And so that's a little bit of my that was my experience. I think I spoke too much, but I have a lot to talk about non-duality, and more about non-duality than my direct experience, because the direct experience, there's much to it. There's not much to it because it's a non-dual state. What can you talk about a non-dual state of consciousness? But it's the consequences, and the whole metaphysics that you can develop based on that, and reintegrate science. My experiences in my background, academic backgrounds in physics. So quantum physics is one area that I've been passionate about, and I've done a lot of research on the foundational and philosophical uh, grounds of quantum physics. So I've seen a lot of parallels between quantum physics, the phenomenology, and the religious mysticism and metaphysics. And my goal is to reintegrate them, not to merge them into one thing in the sense of destroying the individuality of each one, but establishing relations so that people of different backgrounds, if those are those who are scientists or philosophers or spiritual people, they can see that there is no real contradiction between them. If you look at the things from the correct angle, you see that wow, every all of these things they're talking about really ultimately the same thing. So the first accomplishment I had after the experience was a book called Nondual Perspectives on Quantum Physics. It's not about really deeply, it doesn't contain any equations or anything, but it's a sort of a comparative study between quantum physics and its philosophical and metaphysical assumptions, phenomenology of Edmund Husserl insofar as it refers to reduction and that non-dual state of consciousness, and also Advaita Vedanta, which talks about non-duality. It is non-duality. So the book is devoted to these three schools of reality, or looking at the world, and finds a common ground, or a common language that they're using. In quantum physics, it's mathematical; in Vedanta, it's metaphysical; and in phenomenology, it's philosophical. But they're all the same language in the essence. They're all trying to talk about a non-dual reality, which is very hard to grasp or articulate in human language, but it's possible to point to using the human language.